Hello, I am Mark Fishkin, the founder and director of the California Film Institute. And on behalf of the entire organization, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this special conversation with the directors of the Truffle Hunters, Michael Dweck and Gregory Kershaw. I'd like to remind you that the Truffle Hunters is part of the Mill Valley Film Festival Contenders season and is eligible for an Academy Award. The Truffle Hunters debuted at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival and is scheduled to be released this coming March. Michael and Gregory will be in conversation with Academy Award nominated and Emmy-winning director Connie Field. Connie has directed and produced over 17 documentaries. Please enjoy this conversation with Connie, Michael, and Gregory.
First, I want to tell you, I really love this film. And I'm very fond of truffles, and I don't think I've ever eaten a white truffle, but maybe in the future that will happen. So tell me, how did this film start, really?
Well, we had just finished our last film called The Last Race. We were finishing it in New York doing the color grading. And Greg and I hadn't spoken to each other in about a month. And then we got together in the street and we were just saying, so what have you been up to? And we both said to each other, we've been in this town in the mountains in Monferrato, Italy, in the Piedmont mountains. And we came across these little village where there were these truffle hunters in the mountains. And Greg said, I was in the exact same place you were, like a week apart from when I was, which was a strange coincidence. But what on that trip was just that with this culture of truffle hunters, these old men, 85, 90-year-old men, that nobody has ever seen, but they know they exist because they said, whenever there's a truffle that they wanted, like a trattoria, they'd put 50 euros in a box outside the restaurant and then magically appear the next morning a truffle in the box. And they wouldn't tell us anything, but name on the wall, written in pencil from 1940s till the night before, was every truffle this guy's ever purchased, and the weight of the truffle and how much he ever paid, and the initials of a truffle hunter. But of course he wouldn't tell us what the initials meant. And then we just said, well, we have to find out, who these are, and that led us to a 3-year journey, finding out who the people were and how to get into this group a way that seemed organic.
And so tell me, how did you do that? Because they seemed very relaxed. So explain, how did you get their confidence? Really?
Well, we were filming in an area where friendships are made over long meals and lots of wine and lots of espresso. And we spent a lot of time getting to know the community first to get us to build the trust that would even allow us to meet the truffle hunters, because everything about this world is secret. Where they sell the truffles is a secret, where they find them, and even who the truffle hunters are is a secret within the community. So we had to make connections in the community. And then eventually, after a lot of time, we started meeting the real truffle hunters. And for us, the process of filming it really starts with building relationships with the people that we're filming with, building friendships. And that's a way of us, I guess you call it getting access, but it's more than that for us. It's really about understanding their world and understanding their community and understanding the web of relationships that exist around them and the events that are happening in their life. Because we didn't start this film with a story. We started it with this idea of, the world felt like a fairy tale to us. It felt magical when we were there visiting, and we wanted to capture that magic and bring it into a cinematic experience. But the story, it came from spending time there and exploring and understanding what it means to be a part of this community, and understanding what was happening in the lives of the truffle hunters that we were filming. And through the process of making this film over 3 years, these lives that on the surface, I think, seemed, almost, to us, they seemed almost perfect. They seemed to be fulfilling the full potential of what a human life could be. But we found these stories and these very big decisions that each of our characters was making, and these quite dramatic moments that revealed themselves to us over the course of just 3 years of really, ultimately we were making a film, but we were also just, we were engaging in their lives, trying to become part of the family, and hanging out with them.
Did anybody
also,
sort of usher you in terms of other people that you met before you met the people in the village? I know I often do things because people help me and they kind of usher me into a community, someone that the community sort of already knows. Did you benefit from that at all? Did someone help in that way?
Well, we did. We had a bunch of help. Well, first we had our translator, Letitia, became our co-producer, and she's from the region. Her grandparents and grandparents are from Piedmont, and they don't speak Italian in that region. They speak Piedmontese, a dialect, and that dialect is very much like, it's kind of like a Yiddish thing. It's like this beautiful conversation, and it has a lot of innuendo and a little bit of bantering and things. So she understood that, and that helped quite a bit. We had to kind of dig deep, and it was very difficult because on this there were touristy truffle hunters. The guys, they have this uniform and a truffle hunting badge and a dog, and they bury a truffle in the ground. Tourists pay a lot of money, and then, oh, lo and behold, in 10 minutes you find a truffle. In the real world, maybe in 3 weeks, going out every night, 10 hours a night, walking. These men walk 15, 20 miles a night in the dark in the woods, and maybe they find one this big in 3 weeks, because you can't cultivate them. They attach themselves to roots of oak trees, so they're very, very perfect condition to grow. So first, I think we ended up talking to a priest in the town because we thought we'd tell us the truth, because a lot of what this whole world of truffle hunting is all lies. Nobody will admit they got a truffle. Nobody admits that truffle hunting exists. None of its truffles exist. And even the trade, I mean, we were told, well, how does it go from a truffle hunter to the market? How does that happen? They said, well, finally, like 3 months, someone said, okay, Wednesday, you have to go to town at 3 o'clock in the morning in the shadow of a church, and you'll see what goes on. And we went that day. Right away, we went to the town during the day and asked somebody, do you know anything about like all these truffle hunters exchanging truffles 3 in the morning right here in where next to the church? No, I've lived there 50 years. It doesn't happen. And of course, we showed up there at 3 in the morning, and there it was, this vibrant, a bunch of old men with trench coats on and rain hats. It was freezing, and there was a car pulling up with, open the back, and 1974 little 4-wheel drive, and all of a sudden the entire square just blossomed with the smell of white truffles. And there was like drug dealers. They were going down alleyways, just choo, 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 choo. And they were like cash and running away. And so within 20 minutes, it was over. Empty square, gone.
Wow.
It was that quick. So like Greg was saying, the whole world was a secret. And then we tried to find one guy who was scraggling along. We talked to him. Can you please help us? No. And then we said, okay, let's talk to the head of the Truffle Association. Let's bring him with us the next Wednesday, 3 in the morning. We went with him, and they thought that he was with us and we were with the federal government. We were with the taxation agents. So he got screwed. He's like, now you screwed me, because they think I'm with you and they think you're with the taxation department. So, but eventually, we met one person to another person to another person, and it was, and I think, there was one time he went out at night with one man who took us out, and he hadn't found a truffle because there was a drought for like 3 months, and he found a truffle, and we thought he was going to sell it on the side of the road to a truffle dealer, John Franco, and instead he invited us to his house, to a little cabin in the woods, and went out, got some wood, put it into his wood stove, went out, got eggs from his chickens, and his cast iron stove, cracked some eggs, and then started to shave the truffle. And we said, what are you doing? He said, well, this is for you. Welcome to my family. And from that moment on, we were kind of in, because he was a truffler who no one knows who he is. He's very secret of life, but word spread. Without any technology, they have no phones, no cell phones, no computers, no television sets, but yet word spreads within this region very quickly.
Amazing. Really, really amazing. Also, you sort of capture in the film a really special relationship between these men and their dogs. I mean, who seem maybe even more special than we have relationships with our dogs, for those of you like dogs. So could you talk a little bit about that and how you captured it and how important that was?
Well, we very early on in the process, I mean, we didn't know anything about the world of truffles before we started this film. We had never had a white truffle. We'd had, you know, I think what most people have experienced is truffles, which is like truffle oil, which actually doesn't have any truffle in it at all. It's just,
Right.
it mimics what a truffle is. But we didn't know about this world. We'd heard, you know, initially in France, they still use pigs, but in Italy, they use dogs. And we quickly realized when we started spending time with these truffle hunters, we realized, well, the dogs they are characters in the story. They're just as important as their truffle hunting companions. And we wanted to figure out a way to represent their perspective in the world. And we had, in the film, we've chosen to show that, I guess, the human viewpoint in these very deliberately framed images. We tried to create each one like a painting. But with the dog point of view, we wanted to capture the frenzy, the chaos, the joy and thrill of running through the forest in search of this truffle that, like, it brings this, you know, euphoric, orgasmic excitement to these dogs. And we realized that we needed a different technique to do that. And so we started experimenting with these different camera rigs, and we found all sorts of like miniature gimbals, like steady cams that would go on a dog, and these elaborate harness systems that we found in the depths of the internet. And none of them really worked to put you in the dog's head. And we finally realized that we were staying in a small town, and there was a cobbler like right down the street from us. And we went into the shoe cobbler, and we explained that we wanted to mount a little GoPro camera on a dog's head. And the next day, he had a prototype for us, and we took it out into the woods with one of our hunters, Sergio. And we put it on the dog's head, and they went out hunting. And 3 hours later, they came back without the camera. But we knew that we knew that we were onto something. So we kept working with this cobbler, and we finally developed these mounts that allowed us to film the dog's perspective of the world, and it allowed us to mount little cameras onto the dog's heads. And that footage was amazing when we first saw it, because you felt the thrill of the hunt. But then we realized that it was showing us something much more than that, because we would set the camera up on the dogs' heads, and we would let the clips roll for, you know, as long as they would last, 3 hours, 4 hours of just hunting in the woods. And we realized the depth of the relationship with the dogs, that these hunters, like Aurelio, for example, we realized that he talks to Burba, not just giving Burba commands of where to look for the truffle, but he has conversations. They're one-sided, but he's talking to the dog as if it was another person, revealing things about himself, how he thinks about the world. And we would also see that, like, some of the hunters, they would be speaking words that we had never heard before. And we asked our translator, who speaks Piedmontese and Italian, and said, "Have you heard these words? What are they saying?" And she said, "I'd never heard of them." We asked the hunters, and it turns out they developed their own language with each of their dogs, with their own set of commands that were specific to that dog, because they spend more time with their dogs by far than any other human being in the world. They're out 12 hours a night in the darkness alone with their dogs. So the depth of the relationship, I mean, it was, you know, I grew up with dogs, and as we mentioned earlier, like I'm a dog lover, and Michael's also a dog lover, but the complexity in relationships was far beyond, I think, what we had ever seen between a human and another animal.
And then the first,
go ahead.
the first time we were invited into a home was Aurelio's home. And I remember he had said to us, I'm cooking lunch. Would you, and I'd like to invite you. So he's cooking soup in the kitchen, and he sets the table. There's 4 plates, but there's just me, Greg, and Aurelio, and Burba. And he's cooking, and finally he gets to the point where he's serving, and he says, "Okay, Burba," and Burba hops up on the table. We haven't seen it yet. He serves Burba, gives all the soup with the carrots and the celery and everything in it, and it's okay. Now you can sit. And we got the broth, and he said, and then he started to carry on a conversation with Burba about Christmas, about how he prepare a very special lunch for Christmas. And what that was going to be, and that's the shot you see in the poster. He's having what looks like an engaged conversation with Burba, and Burba's really focused, and that's their relationship. It's so unusual. Is that, like, An example, like if he drops a glove when he's truffle hunting, or a hat, or Berber just picks it up automatically like his friend and hands it to him. There's a part in the film you see with the accordion. He's playing the accordion as the accordion player, and Berber's there, and Charlie's there, who's also really his other dog. And you see how he drops his glove by accident, and Berber picks it up and gives it to him, and they just keep going on singing. And that's how their relationship is, and that's how the relationship is with most of the hunters and their dogs. They're more like family. They don't, they eat out of plates on the table. They, they take them everywhere where they're going, church, the cafe, newspapers. It's all, they're really very much part of their family.
Well, it is quite amazing. And also the way the image is captured, because normally when I've seen stuff where it's been from an animal's perspective, it's very shaky. I don't know where they placed the camera, but what you captured was not that way. That's really quite amazing. Maybe you should market this contraption.
Oh, you can. Yeah, exactly.
But also in terms of capturing, one of the things that really struck me when I saw it, among lots of other things, is it's beautifully shot. I mean, it's really, really beautiful. So could you tell me something about, how you decided to capture it? And Michael, I know you have an artist background, and what in your background might have influenced that, because it's gorgeous. It's really gorgeous.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, yeah, a lot of my work is in the visual arts and photography, and Greg is in cinematography. And when we first entered this world, we didn't have a story at all. We just knew there was something mysterious and in a way enchanting and magical about this world. And we started to say to each other, it felt like a storybook, like a fairy tale. It wasn't real because nobody was on phones. People were talking, nobody was like, talking, nobody was like, sitting on a computer and ordering stuff on Amazon. It was, and that's what we're used to, of course. So we weren't used to that. It seemed like we were like a 1960s Fellini movie. I mean, to us, it was sometimes pretty comical like that. But the more we were invited into that world, the more we realized that we felt like we had to teach people how to see. How do we have teach the audience how to see it? And this world, it's so simple and so beautiful in many ways, because it hasn't changed. And sometimes some of these homes are 200 years old. And they have rituals. They're farmers during the day, where they're typically working the grapevines. And at night, they're going out truffle hunting 15 to 20 miles a night for 10 hours in the darkness. And so they have beautiful passion. But in their daily life at home, you see these rituals where they sit in the same table and they fit for breakfast and lunch and dinner, and they have the same conversations pretty much. And these worlds are just, they look like paintings. And we spent a lot of time, we have a van that we're driving. It says the happy blue van on the side of it. We rented all the equipment's in the back. And that's what we did, 2 of us filming. And so it's a really small crew, 2 of us, 1 person and our translator. And it gives us a lot of time to talk to each other. And we only shot at the most 1 shot a day. And we only shot when it felt right. And when it felt right was when they felt comfortable enough with us where we'd almost disappear, which took, that's 3 years to make the film. And we also, try to find things that look visually beautiful. And we kept thinking, how do you immerse an audience into this place, feel the way we feel right now? How do we do that? And a lot of that was waiting, of having, because you're tempted, especially you're a documentarian, you're tempted, wow, something's going to happen. Carlo, unfortunately, he took a roll down a hill and hit himself. Well, we could have been hunting with him that night, but you're tempted to do all these things, but no, well, we have an opportunity the next day, the doctor. And, maybe the best way to, to kind of capture that moment. And you wait. If the light's not, we didn't shoot. It was, it took quite a bit of patience.
I know you shot it over 3 years, but how much time did you actually spend there? I was just curious.
We were there during, we would go mostly during the truffle hunting season, which which starts at the end of September and runs, depending on the year, through the end of January. So we would be, during that time, we'd be there for 3 weeks, usually 3 weeks on, and then we'd kind of leave for maybe 2 weeks and come back. And we did that throughout the whole season. And then we would check in during the off season. So we would come in the middle of winter, we'd come in spring, and we would try to have a consistent presence in their lives. And I mean, the idea of spending so much time there and spending so much time in the filmmaking process was really to immerse ourselves in this world, and not just so we could capture more filming, but so we could really feel it and understand it. Because it's I guess there's kind of two truths that exist in the world. There's the factual truth, like if we, there's the facts about truffles, and there's the facts, the quantifiable things in the world. But then there's also this subjective truth, like what does it mean to feel a world, and how do you express that to an audience, the things that you can't quantify. And you have your first impression of a subjective truth when you arrive in an area. But it changes the more time you spend there, and you get to know it deeper, and you get to see it in different ways, and you get to see it. You've uncovered new layers. And I think the filmmaking process for us was very much about that. It was about finding these new layers. Every time we would go back, we would learn more about the characters' lives, but we would also see the world in a different way. And we would see things that we hadn't seen before. And it was a very organic evolution that happened between, Michael and I and the people that we were filming, because we were spending so much time together. There was this constant dialogue that Michael and I were having about the world that we were filming, and also just about our lives surrounding the filming, about the art that we were consuming, about the movies that we were watching, about the books that we were reading. And all of that is kind of being somehow filtered into the world that we're filming and what we're getting from the people that we're filming. And then, the process is like, how do you spin that all into cinema,
Well, it seems to me you were very cinema conscious, because
yeah,
it's beautiful. So you obviously at a fairly early point decided on a look that you really wanted this film to have, which is I think fairly unusual in a kind of observational documentary. I've rarely really seen that, and especially because yours is fairly stylized, which is wonderful. And the other thing I really also noticed with the film is the layering of the sound that you captured that sort of put us there. Could you talk about also how you did that?
Yeah, well, we decided early on to start building a sound library in the process. So we made sure that, with our sound recordist, his name is Mattia, and what was interesting about him is that he was always up for a challenge, and he always liked to talk to us. He'd say to us, tell me what you want to feel from this. What are you talking about? And like an example would be, we'd be in a forest and we'd say, Mattia, listen to the orchestra. Listen. And the wind was so beautiful in some of these forests. And then we'd go to another forest, like with Sergio, where the opening scene of the film was going up with the cliff, the dog. And it was like a symphony. It was a symphony of these beautiful sounds, from dogs barking way off in the valleys. There were church bells on this side. There was a beautiful wind. There was a spring or a creek somewhere down below that we couldn't see. And they were like, it was very much like a symphonic experience. And we said, okay, that's what we wanted to feel. So he was, okay, I got it. So he would get there before we got there. He'd come days after we left. He'd spend weeks in there and just start recording a library of sounds, of things that we wanted. And he started to develop all these little special microphones that we wanted. Like, we wanted to know how the dogs felt. That was really important to us. Why was a dog, running through the forest and stopping and looking up and smelling what was going on? So we'd have microphones the size of like a rice kernel attached right near the dog's nose and near the paws also. So we can start recording all those sounds that he had, like a little tiny power pack. So the dog wasn't bothered by it, got used to it. So we recorded everything in hinges. We said, okay, we're in Angelo's house, the guy with the typewriter, and he's cooking a chicken in a pot of soup. How does it smell? How do we get the audience to smell the mustiness of an early 18th century Italian, villa, right? That's aged. So we said, well, we do that with sound. a lot of ways. So that was, you know, very important.
Or you could have
part
a
of the
smell
process for us.
around the way Les Blank used to
Wish.
do.
We wish. That would have been great. Great.
Yeah, I thought it was amazing. Where did this sound guy come from?
From Italy. He lived in Milan, and we found him just through a referral. Somebody just said, here's a guy, has a lot of equipment. Technically, he's an experimenter. So he might be good. He was up for the challenge because there was a lot of, you know, it was very challenging shoots most of the time. A lot of time because it was waiting around. Most of the time, sound people are ready to go, right?
Mhm.
We shot one shot a day at the most. Most of the time, no shots a day. And he was just sometimes bored out of it, but it gave him a chance to really start experimenting. So he'd come back with these microphones, these 360 microphones, to start recording what things sounded around. So by the time he got to Skywalker, we had some great materials to work with. And the sound was very much like what Greg was talking about, is very much subjective sound. You know, we started to, like, there's one scene where the man at the end, who's our truffle judge, he's eating this meal, this beautiful meal at the end of a truffle, and it's being shaved, and you see him eat it, and the sound you really hear in the theater, but the sound is going from outside. You take somebody from objective into the subjective world. It fills his mind. As soon as he's eaten the third bite of the truffle, he's in the euphoric pleasure that you see, you feel, which is kind of the way that works. But we think sound is kind of half the film in this case.
Yeah. No, you did a really great job. One thing I was really curious about, because you also captured the side of the marketers and the people who eat the truffles, and you know, it's this very erudite, you know, kind of world and upper class world in many ways. And what do our truffle hunters really make? How much money do they make when they sell these truffles? I mean, how much is it?
Well,
I mean, they're not rich.
Yeah, I mean, that contrast of these two worlds, I mean, that was something that initially we were immediately struck by when we started learning about this world. And there's an absurdity to the idea that, I mean, there's that truffle auction, and there's that truffle that is sitting on that pillow that is displayed like a precious gemstone. That it was a little less than a kilogram, and it sold for almost $100,000. And it was shipped somebody immediately took it and put it in a briefcase on ice and brought it to Dubai. So this is a fungus that if you don't eat it in 3 days, it's gone. It's no longer edible, and it can sell for almost the price of gold. And
did a rich sheik buy it? Is that who bought it?
Well, we don't. I mean, that's,
they never tell us.
Who can pay? I don't know who can pay $100,000 for a truffle, but yeah, I think you have to have a lot of money to burn if you want to do that. So that contrast to the world of the truffle hunters was just always quite absurd to us. And the truffle hunters, that was what attracted us to the project. I mean, Michael and I think, if, you know, when these worlds, these places where people are disconnected from digital technology, the global capitalism, and then all these forces that have kind of pulled at our lives and taken us away from nature and taken us from community. Like, when we search out communities that have that still have their soul intact, because there's a feeling that you can't really describe when you're in a place like that fills you, and that fills the lives of the people that we're with. And this passion for truffle hunting, the way, I guess we've talked about it, like the way that it's like what filmmakers do when they're making a film. Like, you make a film, they truffle hunt because they have to. It's because it's what they love to do, and they don't. It's nice when they get money for their truffles. They're happy, but that's not why they do it. And it's the same thing for making a film. You make a film because you have to. There's something compelling you to do it, and you're going to do it if you don't make any money, and you're going to do it if it costs you money. And so I think they're aware that the market is not working for them, and they're aware that, you know, somebody is making a lot of money off of it. And I think
do they know how much? And also, why don't they just charge more? I mean, these things are going to sell. You know, you can only find them in certain places in the world. So
I-
why
it-
why don't they charge more? I'm
Well,
really curious.
the thing is, because everything in this world is so secret, and because this market is so small, no one really knows the price of a truffle from day to day. So it's this game. I mean, it's this game that Gianfranco is playing, the truffle dealer is playing with the truffle hunters. And sometimes I think they get the price that they want, sometimes they don't. But the other thing is that just in order for that truffle to get to Dubai or New York City or Paris or wherever these truffles go, it goes through several different middlemen, and each person is taking a cut and raising the price along the way. So I think the market, if you're buying directly from the truffle hunters, it's always going to be a lot less expensive than it is if you're buying in a very fancy shop in Manhattan, because that truffle also has to get there. It has to get from the hand of the truffle hunter who pulled it out of the ground to that shop or to that restaurant within 3 days, hopefully a lot less, because if not, it's no longer edible.
You can't find them. You can't find the truffle hunters. That's the problem for anybody. If one is not in your family, even if they're in your family, they don't share anything. They have these diaries they keep that go back sometimes 200 years of diaries, and they keep charts and maps. Every time they go out, they come back, they spread out the diaries and they compare. They look at the humidity, the last time lightning struck, what the moisture in the soil was, the phase of the moon, and they track all this to predict. It's like fishing, to predict where that truffle might show up again.
Wow.
And what chance they have of getting it, because the chance of getting a truffle is zero pretty much every night. So and even if they get one, they tell anybody they got one. Nobody. You can smell it on them. You can smell. You'll see two guys in the cafe, and you can tell they just came out of the woods because they're full of mud, and they both have their dogs. And one will say to the other one, "So how'd you do?" "Man, I haven't found a truffle in months." And he says, "But I heard 20 miles that way in this other valley, somebody found a truffle yesterday." And he goes, I heard the same thing. I haven't found one either, but I heard 20 miles the other way, they found a truffle. And meanwhile, both of them, we know, and they reek from truffles. I mean, we were with them, and they found truffles. But they've been best friends. So two of these guys were named Aldo. They were the first time we met them. Both these guys, they were 89, right, Greg? They were 89 and 90 years old. And we said, "How long have you been friends?" And they said, "Probably 85 years. And do you go truffle hunting every day?" "Yep." "Do you know each other? Do you know if others ever got a truffle?" "Nope." We'll never tell each other ever. Yeah. So that's the code.
That's amazing. I also heard that there's a special way that you pick a truffle so that it will regrow.
Yep.
Is that true?
Yeah. Well, the truffles, they're basically bonded to the tree that they are found on. So if you take it out too early and the truffle hasn't bloomed, it hasn't had time to release the spores, which will attach to that same root that it grew from and grow again next year. So that's the one of the problems in the region. And there's a lot of reasons that there are fewer and fewer truffles every year, but one of the reasons is there's just a lot of people that are out there trying to make a quick buck, and when they find a truffle, they don't want to wait. And it's a problem with a younger generation, not really the generation that we film, but they'll take it too early, and they might be able to sell that truffle, but next year there won't be one. And the truffle, I mean, finding a truffle, it's so difficult. I mean, the people that we film, they have this knowledge that was passed down to them through the generations. It took a lifetime for them to develop, and then you also have to have a dog that's trained at least 3 years, and it has to be they pick the special dogs that are the smartest and have the best sense of smell. So I mean, just finding these white truffles, it's really next to impossible, and they can't be cultivated, and they're only found on this very thin strip of land that runs mostly through northern Italy and a little bit through the neighboring countries. But every year there are fewer and fewer truffles, partly because people aren't doing it the right way. The younger generation isn't doing it the right way, partly because of climate change, and also because of deforestation. The region where we filmed, it's known for producing some of the best wine in the world. That's where Barolo and Barbaresco come from, which is great wine. And one of the crazy things that's happening because of climate change is now land that previously wasn't really good for the Nebbiolo grape, which produces those wine, is now becoming a good place to grow. And so they're stripping a lot of the forest to make way for vineyards. And you know, the vineyards look beautiful and they produce great wine, but it's coming at a great cost to this community that is really dependent on a very small slices of forest land that are still producing truffles.
And, you created some organization that would buy the land and preserve it. I read something about that. Is that actually happening?
Yes, it's happening and funded. It's called the Truffle Hunters Land Conservation Program, and it's an impact initiative born from the film to provide funding and strategic support for organizations on the ground whose job is to really preserve the forest, because we want to preserve the culture. Without the forest, there's no culture, and also to offer an educational program to school kids, where the school kids will be brought in with the truffle hunters into the forest and just teach them about this, you know, intimate relationship you can have with the forest as opposed to your phone. But we've already last week we set the first part of our funding, so they're purchasing 5 acres of land where we made the film, and we're going to make there'll be another purchase probably in 2 more weeks, and this will be a self-sustaining program. So it just continues. You keep buying, you know, more of the land up that's there. It's a nonprofit, and hopefully just be able to protect this culture, you know, forever.
Well, how much land would you guys have to buy to actually really protect that culture? Because 5 acres isn't very much.
Well, it's not. We think in this case, we think somewhere around 35 to 40 acres would be good enough, because it's a very, very thin strip of land. And we, like Greg was saying, we're competing against wineries. You know, wineries are, because the clay, because Nebbiolo needs the same soil content that truffles need. Like it's a lot of clay, and the acidity of soil is very particular to this region. So we, you know, last week, like, we spoke to a wine producer in the region, who's agreed to every hectare of land that they purchase for grape growing, that they'll purchase a hectare of land for a truffle conservation program.
That's great. That's great.
So yeah, so we think it's scalable, and we think it could be a successful program. We have everybody, like the schools have agreed that we can, you know, bring the kids into the forest. The truffle hunters are all, you know, they're enthused about it, and we think we can get a lot of the community, a lot of the manufacturers in the community that are making food products, pasta and wines. We can kind of get them involved too, to kind of pitch in.
That's great. And so the hunters themselves really like this. They're happy about it.
They love it.
Okay.
We're going to protect their land, because right now the law in Italy is you can hunt for truffles on any land. There's no such thing as private. So I can go to your backyard and hunt for truffles, and that creates a problem. And most of the time the land is not valued high, because the land they look at it as being firewood. When we got a phone call from Sergio, the guy who was in the bathtub with his dog, who's also climbing up the cliff. He called us one morning at like 4:30 in the morning, and he's crying. And he said, "You have to come down right away. Come down here right away. You have to help me." And we drove the van like crazy down to this valley. And when we got there, we had filmed there the day before. There was 2 guys with chainsaws that had stripped these 200-year-old oak trees down to the stump and taken the firewood. They were still there. They were just finishing. There was 1 tree left. And Sergio was begging it was like a hailstorm. And Sergio was begging them, crying, do not cut this tree. And the guy says, "I paid 200 euros for this firewood." It was like 2 hectares of land. I paid 200 euros, so it's my wood. I'm taking it. He's trying to explain, but this is my family. I know these trees. These trees are alive. You're killing these trees in my family. And it was a very emotional moment. But that actually was one of the reasons that we decided to start this conservation program, because we realized how simple it was. In 20 minutes,
Did he stop?
The forest was cut down.
Did he left that one tree?
He left that one tree. Yeah. But that's part of the land we're going to buy.
One thing I picked up on, I guess this must be, I didn't know this, but so black truffles, you can cultivate black truffles, right? Because in France, there's all these, you know, truffle farms with their little electric fences, so nobody gets in, and you see all the oak trees, and they're cultivating truffles. So the black ones we can cultivate, but the white ones you can't. Is that the deal?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
The white ones are almost impossible to find a white truffle. I mean, we were with some truffle hunters at Gidio. He hires a water diviner to come to his property and to tell him, is it a good property to buy or not? So he takes a stick, ties it in a knot, and he's like an engineer, comes in a suit and tie, and he evaluates your land based on where he thinks there's an electrical current, electrical magnetic current under the soil, which in his theory is where truffles grow. So everybody has their own little theories. They're all trying to, you know, yeah, but they all have their own hypothesis of how they grow, and they stick to it.
Okay, well, one last question. Were you surprised by the reception that the film has had? Because people really love the film a lot, and it's gotten a lot of places. So did you expect that? Has that been surprising, or?
We finished the film the day before Sundance. I mean, we had never seen it with anybody but the finished film, with anybody but our sound mixer. And, you know, we had a very tight group of people making this film, and we hadn't really shown it to many people. We made a film that we loved, but it was a very different kind of documentary. You know, it was, and we knew that, and the subject matter was very different. And we had absolutely no idea what to expect on the first screening at Sundance. And I think we were, I mean, yeah, it was great, because I think the thing that's been most surprising in the most pleasant way is, like, we had so much fun making this film, and we've just this world. We were lifted up by this world, by the people that we were filming with. Like, they emanated joy, and their lives they were so rich in so many ways, very simple ways, but they were like so rich in all these things that are being stripped away from our lives in modernity, and they had that, and we wanted to share that with our audience. Like, that was that feeling that we felt. We wanted to pass that on to the audience, and it feels like that's the conversation that's happening, and that's I mean, I don't think we could ask for anything more than that.
Especially during this pandemic, we realized the things that we're missing, right? Being close to people, you know, and also I think a lot of people are realizing, you know, reconsidering their lives in cities. Gregory and I both live in cities. I live in New York. Greg lives in Stockholm, and you know, you're reevaluating your life now, thinking maybe I should, you know, have a simpler life, not so reliant on technology, you know.
Well, except that technology has allowed people to live simpler.
Oh, it does. Oh, there's some great
jobs too.
There are some great things that technology offers us, of course, but there are also some trappings too. Yeah.
Well, I just really want to congratulate both of you. It's a wonderful, wonderful film, and I'm glad that the experience making it is as wonderful as the film. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. It's an honor to be talking to you, and we really appreciate it.